Okay, so Blackwater and the pardons. So just, I mean, despite I put out a video day before yesterday. I don't know. It was this week talking about the pardons. Power of the pardon, absolute, despite what certain judges question and what other lawyers think. You can't get impeached for a pardon, and nobody can tell you that your pardon is invalid. So there will be no issue on that. How they get exercised.
You can't reverse a pardon like some idiots are proposing. The same people that tell you standing is a serious legal doctrine on the left are telling you can reverse pardons. I mean, that's how political they are. I mean, they've quit being impartial, objective observers of the law of any kind, unfortunately.
No, so I mean, and I'm seeing it, and I didn't, I have to double check things myself. I don't only listen. I listen to you. I don't only listen to you. I listen to the people who have proven themselves to be unreliable, just so I can know what other people are hearing, and I need to verify it myself. So I feel satisfactorily confident in believing pardon's absolute. Can't get impeached for it. It can't be reversed. Maybe they can try to dig up other issues to go after the person as retribution, whatever. Or reprisals, I should say. So Trump has pardoned a bunch of people. Charles Kushner, Jared Kushner's father, I think that pardon looks bad. It smells bad. It might be bad. It probably is bad. And it will allow other pardons, which might be more questionable, to be to have a sort of a doubt cast on them. First things first, a lot of people think pardons should, they go to the most deserving of these egregious injustices. How do pardons typically work? I'm seeing that they look to be politically oriented 95% of the time.
No doubt about that. And I think, the way Trump has approached it is actually, I would say, much more disciplined and less political than his predecessors. So, W pardoned a bunch of political allies. Clinton pardoned a bunch of political allies. Poppy Bush pardoned everybody connected to Iran-Contra. So and those were real scandals, frankly, compared to some of the made up or built up scandals in the cases of the people Trump has pardoned. But they pardoned, frankly, more, and they exercise the pardon power a lot more than Trump has. So that's part one. Part two is mostly, if you look at Trump's pardons, they fit two themes. They're either people who have long since served their sentence, who he believes have done steps to make their lives better and to make society better. And so they deserve to have this stain on their reputation removed. And that's why he did Kushner's father-in-law. His son-in-law's father.
Charles Kushner.
Yes. So there were some things that guy did or was accused of doing that where, I used to say he wasn't necessarily the brightest criminal in the world. But at the same time, there were some questions about tactics Christie chose to use in that case. So there are some fair questions because that kind of ties into the other theme. So, and in those themes, when people get all mad about Kushner, it's like he's already served his time. You just care about what label is put next to his name.
Well, they care about whether or not he has his civil civil disabilities removed. He can run for office. He gets perks that low level marijuana offenders don't get just because they're not the father-in-law of Trump's son-in-law. And I see it, I feel it, and I see that's the way it looks. It's going to be very difficult to convince anyone otherwise.
My view is I'm not I agree with the left. I'm not in favor of a lot of those lifetime punishments for people on civil remedies. So I think all your rights should be restored. Now, usually, most felons can get their rights restored. So he may have already got his rights restored, and he may live in a state where that's easy to accomplish anyway. But my view is that once you serve your time, you serve your time, and there shouldn't be a lifetime punishment of voting. It also creates bad incentives for the state to do bad things, to go after people, to simply deprive them of the ability to run for office. I knew a great judge in Chattanooga that served time and got his sentence expunged and all the rest because of good acts. And he made a great judge. It was ridiculous that he was ever put in that position, in my view. So I don't see those as that problematic. I see that as mostly just, saying, hey, they've done good stuff, and I'm going to reward them for doing good stuff by restoring their reputation. And to the degree they're restoring their civil remedies that shouldn't have been removed from them in the first place, in my view. The theme for all of the others that he pardoned is that you have been identified, to him at least, as victims of politicized prosecutions. And in my view, so I thought, okay, I can't look at all the cases. Most of the people he pardoned were people that already served their time or large parts of it. Even Manafort had served a large part of his sentence. So I looked at and was older already, and putting him in further prison didn't even make sense in my view. Whatever you thought of Manafort, though clearly he was targeted for politicized purposes, and there was all kinds of problems in that prosecution beyond that. But I figured I'd take the most controversial one, the Blackwater one, the Blackwater 4, And digging in, I was shocked at how much the media's campaign against these guys are built on lies. So I mean, basically what happened is they were purely politicized targets. So, they were defending diplomats and protecting diplomats in Iraq. Well, like, again, we probably shouldn't have been in Iraq in the first place, but that's not their fault. They were Blackwater contractors. They went to secure a local square near where this diplomat was in trouble because they thought that was necessary and had been a prior source of problems. And they go and they do that. And when they go there to do that, they believe they came under fire. Several of them fire back. Then they leave. The State Department investigates and clears them. 3 weeks later, the FBI takes up the case. What happened was they end up getting caught in the middle of a transition. W leaves and Obama gets elected. Obama wants out of Iraq because he promised to get out of Iraq. He wants political cover to do so. And Obama's anti-Blackwater. Blackwater, Eric Prince, and other people are tight with Republicans, not with Democrats. And he doesn't like, so he wants to sort of have a smear on Blackwater as well. And Holder takes up the case, and they do every kind of shenanigan name you can imagine. I mean, they manipulate venue. Like, the case is tried in D.C. when none of them live in D.C. because they tell one of them, "Oh, can you fly into D.C.? We need to talk to you." And then they have him appear in front of a federal judge and then claim he was arrested, even though they never physically arrest him. And they use that as the jurisdictional pretext to have the entire case decided in D.C. The initial D.C. judge dismissed the entire case because it was the product of either improperly immunized information or coerced testimony in violation of the Fifth Amendment. Somehow the D.C. Circuit, of course, finds a way to reinstate it and says, well, you can pretend all that tainted fruit doesn't exist and still bring a prosecution. That's how we enforce the Fifth Amendment in America. And some of that, by the way, is thanks to Scalia and some justices who've made some bad rulings on that. Who've wanted to get rid of certain rules from Miranda and the rest from day one they got on the bench. That's why they're selectively originalist. A lot of these supposed originalists. Thomas is the only one that even cares, in my view. So then the case gets reinstated. One of them gets dismissed, and they bring him back under first-degree murder charges. They have no real evidence of that. Much of the evidence it doesn't exist because there was some of the evidence that does exist doesn't show up until 7 weeks it doesn't show up for 7 years until midweek of the trial, midway through trial, which include photos which appear to refute a lot of their claims. They were going around offering to buy people's cars that supposedly had ballistic proof of damages. Well, of course, that's Iraq, where you're basically bribing witnesses, saying, "Hey, you want some money? Say you were here and that something bad happened to you, and that these guys did bad, and we'll pay you for it." That's basically what the government did. They apparently suborned perjury that came out during the sentencing stage, where somebody's victim impact statement directly contradicted their trial testimony. They got one person to confess and cut a plea deal. He's the one who admits he fired just everywhere. But then they get him to shift the blame during trial, and his story changes 4 or 5 times. There was evidence at trial that they came under fire and fired back, and there was the number of dead and wounded kept changing. One, it's 9, then it's 18, then it's 34, then it's 42, then it's back to 14. I mean, how does this happen? What happened was politically, internally in Iraq, they wanted to make an example out of it. In order as an excuse to limit U.S. military presence. Obama wanted a political excuse as cover to get out and to go after Blackwater. So these 4 guys were set up as to be examples. And there were issues with venue, issues with evidence, issues with perjury, issues with how the judge ruled, issues with the whole trial. The sentencing was totally out of whack. Sentenced them using a gun statute. The main sentencing basis was the use of a gun statute that was intended to go at drug dealers who use machine guns. And because they were convicted of voluntary manslaughter, they added on the gun charge to get them like 30 years. And I mean, it was just, so there was a lot. Once I dug into the case, it's not at all like what the media is presented. In fact, the media story doesn't really make sense when you actually dig into the evidence and what evidence exists, which is limited because they had no ballistic evidence, almost no forensic evidence, almost no live witness testimony that could be confirmed in any manner. Lots of unreliable testimony of people's memories that kept changing, testimony influenced by money, testimony influenced by Iraqi prime minister, testimony influenced by the State Department and the FBI to selectively remember this and not that. That I have serious doubts about whether they ever did what they've been accused of doing. So I think the president exercises independent judgment right in that case.
And so, I mean, I looked into it summarily over the weekend. Some of the interesting facts were that the chief eyewitness apparently had ties to insurgents himself.
Yes.
But I mean, the bottom line is, you're looking at a situation where final tally, years later, 17 civilians were shot and killed. And
apparently, I mean, they still don't know because they got different autopsy. Like initially, the reason why the number came down is they submitted a bunch of autopsies saying these people were killed, and they realized the date of the autopsy, but there was no autopsy of the people that they have said died from these guys. Doesn't exist. Instead, they came up with death certificates, but many of the death certificates initially did not even were people who had died before that happened. So that gives you there's just no reliable evidence other than two people who definitely died at the scene. There's no evidence of who else was shot by whom, from where, what happened, how many died, how many were injured. Nobody knows.
All right, and people are going to say, we're satisfied with what we've seen in the news. 17 civilians, armed security guards, just opening fire, and Trump just pardoned mass murderers effectively.
It fits the narrative they like about Trump. It fits the narrative they like about Blackwater, but it doesn't fit the evidence that I saw or read.
And I think at the end of the day, everyone should do your best to look into it. It is one of those gross situations where one way or the other, it's a bad situation, and like I said,
it shouldn't have been there. And
it shouldn't be in a foreign country. They're in a foreign country, running around, with armored trucks and machine guns, helicopters.
It's essentially dealing with insurgents. I mean, you're dealing with insurgents who are going to fake things, who are going to stage things, who are going to set up things to make you look bad. I mean, it's just the nature of it. It's particularly insurgents who don't believe in any limits on the nature of warfare, and frankly, that was the nature of a lot of the Iraqi insurgencies. And you're in a country where tons of people are willing to come forward because they don't want you there. So that's the problem. Credible testimony, all of it was difficult. And then, but my view was the fact that they bought testimony, the fact they didn't present ballistics, the fact that they hid exculpatory evidence, the fact they manipulated the venue. You don't have to do that if you have a clean case.
All right. And now I should mention my chat has been frozen again in StreamYard. So I've missed all the super chats for at least, even my comment saying that my chat is frozen did not come up. I'm just checking on YouTube. So for everybody, I'm sorry. I can't even bring up the chat anymore because I don't see it. But I think, look, this is an interesting one. This is the one where you can understand both sides. This is one also where now that you've seen what happens in the fog of war and in the fog of the media war, and when you've lived what you've lived now, you can see how there might be more to the story than what was reported by the New York Times at the time. And you can see also that, you may never be satisfied one way or the other, and that you might think should never have been there. You should never have people running around with, heavily armed security detail in a foreign country that you have no business being in. This is what happens when that happens. It's like a heavily armed police force. They're going to use those weapons at some point for, whether or not there was a shot fired to trigger it. And it's an ugly situation. But yeah. I looked into it, because the one line tweets, there's more to the one line tweets. And however I feel about this particular part, and it's a complex situation, and it's going to lead to the other.
Yeah, it has the fingerprints of a politicized prosecution. Yep. So again, if you have confidence in your evidence, you don't have to hide evidence. You don't have to suborn perjury. You don't have to manipulate venue. You don't have to manipulate charges. You don't have to be buying off evidence. You don't have to do those things if you have a clean case. They clearly did not have a clean case. And and there were some locals questions. Yeah. Some of them I'll respond to about whether your employer or educational institute can require COVID vaccines as a condition of education. Is actually an ongoing suit that the Children's Defense Fund has helped bring in California. I'll share some of the contents of that suit on our locals board and I'm still researching that question. Same with masks and COVID testing, when HIPAA applies, when it doesn't. It may be the case that we need a new informed consent law, the Nuremberg Accords, to be implemented. It was sort of presumed that they were a part of our law, but it's clear some courts may not consider it that way, or at least some employers currently don't. Some educational institutions currently don't. So that will be the next wave of ongoing litigation. And then somebody asked about about the building a movement, which I'll be doing on the locals board some more different ways people can meaningfully improve their life and the life of those around them. It always starts here. Self-education is self-improvement and self-empowerment. And that's the best place to start. And then know your rights, know your remedies. But there's other things that people can do. I mean, pay attention to the fact that elections are local. That's where it's going to start. Even when it's a federal presidential election, the votes are being counted at your local county. And there's a lot of places to make major change and reform that we'll be coming up with, be working with Richard Barris on, coming up with proposals on that. And then someone asked about, what if you believe the government is beyond redemption? My view is that then it's changing the government and finding the means to do so. And usually that's going to almost always be within our constitutional democracy. It's the best experiment so far of any government out there. I mean, what's the practical alternative? So I think there was an aspect of Q that was a psyop that was meant to recreate the militia camps of the 1990s. That's not a solution. Just look at how that ended. The end is public persuasion, democratic reform, self-improvement, self-education, and making differences with those around you. Those are the only methods that have worked over time, whether you're talking about our revolution or you're talking about Dr. King or Gandhi or others. Other forms of revolution. Our revolution worked because of the way Thomas Paine's message spread throughout taverns throughout colonial America, not because of military tactics. I mean, George Washington never really actually won a single battle. The battle we won was in the court of public opinion. That's what changed things. So the power is still with ordinary, everyday people. And so I never believe our government may be beyond redemption, but that doesn't mean the means of reforming it should be anything other than constitutional democratic means.
I love it. And I love that that's the way you phrase it, because I think everybody here needs to appreciate that, despite some of the more inflammatory rhetoric in the comment section. And people are asking about the forced vaccines, HIPAA violations and face mask laws. That I think will actually be probably the best discussion to have with Dershowitz, because I know you're going to disagree on some big stuff, and it'll make for a good talk and an enlightened debate. So that's going to be my pitch to Alan this week, to get him. If it's not next Sunday, maybe the Sunday after, but maybe next Sunday, because it'll be the new year and it'll be a good time for discussion.
Yes, we can explain the problem. I think it's called Dunger, whatever it is. It's the mental process whereby an expert who would be very skeptical of experts in their own field is unduly deferential to experts in other fields. And in my experience, Dershowitz is a sufferer. So we're going to help him.
Amazing. All right, everybody, with that, sorry I couldn't get to any of the chats for the last 20 minutes, but this was another phenomenal one. We're not going to have a live stream until in the new year. So everybody, Happy New Year. Health and happiness, and above all else, liberty in 2021. May 2021 be freer than 2020 has turned out to be. Robert, I'll talk to you before, but we'll say our proper goodbyes afterwards. Everybody, Happy New Year. Robert, final word.
I'll be over for the next half hour or so over at our locals board, responding to subscribers' comments or questions. And if you're really agitated and want to troll, that's where you can troll me. So vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
Everybody, have a good